إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى أهله ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. We give praise and thanks to Almighty Allah. We ask Him to shower His blessing upon the noblest of mankind, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah. We have not ceased to be on the book, to be treating the book Az-zakaat fi-l-Islaam, fi-Dh-Dhawi-l-Kitaab, was-Sunnah. Zakah in Islam under the light of the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, written by the popular author of Hisnu-l-Muslim, the book of Az-zakaat, Hisnu-l-Muslim, Sheikh Sa'id ibn Wahb Al-Qahtaaniy, Ibn Wahb Al-Qahtaaniy. Now, we had gotten last week. We got to last week we treated Shurut al-Khamis. We went through the shurut, the conditions that must be present for one to pay zakah. The shurut, the conditions that must be present before it becomes obligatory for one to pay zakah. So out of these conditions, we listed them to us. We listed 8 of them. Islam, we went into details about that in the past video recordings. We can access that. Fi-l-Islaam, so only Muslims pay zakah, and zakah is only collected from Muslims. Even if the person is a kafir, but we do not know about his kufr, he exhibits Islam, then we'll collect it from him. 2 is freedom. A slave does not give zakah. Zakah is not collected from a slave because he himself is property, and zakah is on property and wealth. So he is also part of the wealth of somebody else, his owner. 3, certain types of wealth. It's not all types of wealth that is zakatable. It's certain type of wealth that is zakatable. So this zakatable wealth include gold and silver in one category, currency, trade goods, free range, non-working, cattle, sheep, and camels, storable, measurable crops like dates, raisins, and things like that, beans, corn, things like that. that can be stored, and they have a long shelf life, and they are measurable. They can be measured, because the zakah on these types of produce is based on their volume. It's based on their volume, and the minimum threshold, or the threshold for paying zakah on them, is when their volume attains 5 awsuq. 5 awsuq. So we went into details on that. Then the sixth condition, or the next condition, is that or before then, also newly discovered ores and treasures that are buried and discovered, they were buried during the time of Jahiliyyah and are now discovered. All these are the types of wealth. All these are the types of wealth that are zakatable. Wealth outside of these, whatever form they may take, however expensive they are not zakatable. The next thing we looked at is that this type of wealth must be equal to or above a minimum threshold. We told us that the wealth that qualify for zakah are of two types. Number 6 and number 7 over here, which is newly discovered ores and products of mining, and also treasures buried from the time of Jahiliyyah. When do these two things, newly discovered ores and newly discovered treasures that were buried during the time of Jahiliyyah, when they are discovered, one pays at that instant of time, and there is no minimum threshold. Whatever you find there is what you do zakah on. You pay 2.5% if it is newly discovered ore. You pay 20%, 1/5, if it is newly discovered treasure that was buried in the time of Jahiliyyah. So this is one category in terms of nisab. They don't have any nisab. Whatever you find is what you pay zakah on. The remaining gold, silver, currency, trade goods, free-range, non-walking livestock, cattle, that is camel and sheep, and also storable, measurable crops. All of these, they have their nisab. The nisab for gold is 85 grams. That is, there's different opinion, but that is what is most commonly quoted. The nisab for silver, what is commonly quoted, is 595 grams. The nisab for currency is money that is equivalent to the worth of either 85 grams of gold or 595 grams of silver. For trade goods also, whatever you're trading in, once their value reaches the value of 85 grams of gold or 595 grams of silver, then they are zakatable. That is their threshold. That is their nisab. Free range, non-walking camels, cattle, and sheep, we give a chart about what the nisab is. For camel, the minimum is 5. For cows, the minimum, or the threshold rather, is 30. For sheep, the threshold is 40. For camels, the threshold is 5. So once you have these numbers of these types of livestock, then you reach the nisab, and then you pay the zakah on them, as outlined in the chart that we showed us. Then for storable, measurable crops, it is 5 awsuq, which is equivalent to 300 sa'. 5 awsuq, which is equivalent to 300 sa'. 1 sa' is when you join your right and left palm together, and as you open them like that, you scoop up the measurable, storable farm produce. That heap that you have, that you scooped up in both hands, is a mud. 4 of these mud make 1 sa'. So 300 sa' is 300 times 4 in terms of mud. That's 1,000 1,200 mud, 1,200 double hand scoops. So this is what is equivalent to 5 awsuq. This is the nisab for measurable, storable farm produce. Now, so from there, we went to another condition that must be present for one to pay zakah, and that is 100% ownership in this specific type of wealth that has reached the nisab. One should own the thing, and one should have jurisdiction in it. That ownership and jurisdiction must be 100%. One can own a thing partly and also exercise part jurisdiction in it. If that is the case, zakah is not due on one if the portion that one owes out of that property has not reached the nisab. If one jointly owns a thing, and that thing on its whole that one is a co-owner of is at or above the nisab, but one's share in it is below the nisab, then there's no zakah that is compulsory on one to pay. What will be zakatable is one's share, a property that one has 100% jurisdiction and ownership in, then that is zakatable. That is zakatable. Then the next is that this thing that we want to pay zakat on must go through its tenure, which is the hawl, in Arabic. So when we go back to this, things that are zakatable, we see that gold, silver, currency, trade goods, free range, non-working livestock, all of these, one is to do zakah, one is to pay zakah on them after every lunar calendar has passed. After 1 year, from the time when they have attained the nisab, their quantity has attained the nisab, one begins to count. 1 year after that, one pays the zakat on them. So these 4 things: gold and silver in one category, currency, trade goods, then free range non-working livestock, that is camels, sheep, and cattle. For storable measurable crops, their due time for zakat is when they are harvested. One does not wait for a year. Their due time for zakah is when they are harvested. So if it takes weeks for them to produce, or months, or a year, or 2 years, whatever the case may be, when they are harvested, that is when zakah will be due upon them. For ores, zakah is due for ores, newly discovered ores, and newly discovered treasures that were buried in the time of Jahiliyyah. Their own tenure is the instant in time when they were discovered. As soon as they are discovered, zakah becomes due upon them. So we see that these categories of wealth are split into 3 with respect to their tenure, or the time span that one waits for before paying zakah. For ores, newly discovered ores and newly discovered treasures that were buried during the time of Jahiliyyah, it is an instant. Once you discover, you pay. For crops that are measurable and storable, the time to pay, the time to wait before paying, is the time it takes them to mature to harvest. Once the time of harvest has arrived, then zakah is due on that. Every other thing, one waits for a year. So that year is what we have been taking for the past few weeks, and we go to Shart al-Khamis, Madyu al-Hawl fi ghayri mu'ashar. So the Sheikh rahimahullah explained to us that what we just told us about these 3 classifications of tenure the time ones that you pay at an instant, the time ones that you pay when the crops have reached their time of harvest, the ones that you pay when 1 year has passed. Then the Sheikh rahimahullah brought our attention to certain things. One is that free-range non-working animals, the tenure, the time to wait before paying zakah on their offspring is the time that one waits for the parents. So if one has a stock of adult animals and they give birth, then the time one will pay zakah on the offsprings is the time one will pay zakah on the parents. If the parents were gotten in Muharram, for instance, or the parents reached the nisab in Muharram, and meaning one is to pay the zakah in Dhul Hijjah, then any offspring that they produce during that time will be added to their number, to the number of the parents, to determine what will be paid in zakah in Dhul Hijjah. However, if it is new stock that is brought, not that they are offsprings of this current stock, then those new stock, their own howl will be counted separately. Their own howl will be counted separately. So as it is for animals, the Sheikh Rahimullah told us it also applies to money. That if you have money and that money earned you profits, then that profit is like the offspring of the capital that you had initially, the money that you had initially. So you treat it the same way. Any profit that is earned while you are waiting to pay zakah on the capital that has attained the nisab or is above the nisab, when it is time to pay zakah on that capital, you add the profit to it and sum it up to know what you are going to extract 2.5% from. So after the Sheikh had taken us through this, last week we went through what he said, rahimahullah, about termination or truncating of the counting of the tenure, the howl. That while we are waiting to pay zakah, we have a specific type of wealth that is zakatable and it has attained the nisab or is above it. So while we are waiting to pay zakah on it, if certain things happen, once they happen, the counting becomes truncated. It becomes invalidated. Zakah no longer applies. We have to wait until certain things happen again, and then we start counting. What are these things? Last week we said the first of these is إذا نقص النصاب أثناء الحول قبل تمامه. If the wealth that one has attained the nisab or is above the nisab, one begins counting. So let's say it attained the nisab in Muharram. One is to pay zakah in Dhul Hijjah. Before Dhul Hijjah, any time before Dhul Hijjah, إذا نقص النصاب, if that wealth dips in value below the threshold, below the nisab, then there's no longer there's no zakah to pay again. The counting that one has been doing becomes truncated, invalidated, and one will have to wait till what happens? Till that wealth rises to attain the nisab again or exceed the nisab. Then at that point, when it attains the nisab, one begins to count another howl. One begins to count another howl. So for instance, if it's if in Rabi'ul Awwal it dipped below the nisab. Initially, it was a nisab in Muharram. Rabi al-Awwal, it dipped below the nisab. The counting is truncated. Then in Ramadan, it reached the nisab again. Then one starts counting from Ramadan, meaning Sha'ban of the next year, one is going to pay zakah on that wealth. So this is the first thing that can happen to truncate the counting of the hawl, of the tenure, of the time to wait before paying zakah. The second thing that the Sheikh rahimahullah mentioned is that what truncates the counting is either ba'a nisab. So let's take the second and third that he mentioned. If the wealth that has attained the nisab is sold or exchanged for another class of wealth that is also at or above the nisab, because the wealth has changed, then the counting becomes truncated. But this does not apply when we are talking about either gold or silver plus currency and trade goods. If one has gold, I said either gold or silver, not gold and silver. If one has gold and he has currency and he has trade goods, or he has silver and he has currency and he has trade goods, and he changes or sells one for the other, because they are classed as one, even though there are three different groups, but they are three subgroups of one general group. So because this is the case, the hawl is not truncated in this case. Trade goods are priced, which is currency. The currency's value is determined based on either gold or silver. So when you change your gold to fiat money, the value is retained in it. When you convert it to trade goods, the value is retained in it. So this is the only time when value, these are only three things where value is what you spend or what you pay zakat out of. So if you're selling shoes, for instance, when it's time to pay zakat, you don't extract 2.5% of the number of shoes in your shop. No, it is the value that you extract. Likewise money, likewise gold. For money and gold, of course, 2.5% you can pay in cash. Since there's no other way of extracting the value from your cash except for by paying cash. Likewise, gold and silver. For gold and silver, you can, if you have a gold, a woman has a gold, a man, if a man has a gold jewelry, for instance, that he doesn't wear, then he is to pay zakah on it. The difference of opinion about whether to pay zakah on jewelry is for women. Whether to pay zakah or not to pay zakah is for women. So for if a man has jewelry, because he's not allowed to wear jewelry in Islam, then he must pay zakah on that. So if one has this, you can pay in gold or you can pay in cash, because it's one and the same. Now, so with these three, one pays one zakah. When one sells them or when one trades them, it doesn't affect, it doesn't truncate, it doesn't invalidate the hawl, the counting of the hawl. Whether you sell them, whether you exchange them for each other, it doesn't matter. But when you exchange or sell any of these for any in the other categories, whether it is you exchange gold for free-range non-working animals, or you sell gold to get free-range animals, or you sell free-range animals in order to get money or gold, then you have changed the type of wealth. You change the type of wealth. Also, if you change gold for silver, remember we said gold or silver, not gold and silver. They're treated as separate. So one gold and silver in one subcategory, currency in another, and trade goods are three subcategories of one category. In the category of gold and silver, they are further classed into two: gold separate, silver separate. So gold, if you sell it for silver, you have sold it for another type of wealth. If silver, if you sell it for gold or exchange it for gold, you have converted it to another type of wealth. So the old counting ceases to be valid, and you now start counting again once the new thing that you have now is at or above the nisab. Now, so this is what the Sheikh Rahimahullah said. Then over here, we added that At-Tabeeb ala al-Thani wa-Thalith. We should take note with respect to these two things that the Sheikh said, i.e. if we trade or exchange wealth that is at a nisab for another category of wealth that is at a nisab, that the counting becomes truncated. That yabda'u, the Sheikh said, in qatl hawl illa fi urud al-tijara. We talk about urud al-tijara, it doesn't apply. يبدأ من الأول الحول في مال جديد إذا كان مالا زكويا وبلغ النصاب. So in these two cases, when you trade wealth that's a nisab, or you exchange wealth that is at a nisab for another type of wealth, that's second type of wealth, the new type of wealth that you now possess. You will start counting its hawl if two conditions are met. That thing that you exchange it for is zakatable. If you exchange gold for shoes, for instance, then, or you sold it in order to get shoes, or you sold shoes in order to, if you sold gold in order to get shoes, shoes are not zakatable. If you sold gold in order to get diamond, diamond is not zakatable. So when you sell or exchange something that is zakatable, wealth that is zakatable and is at the nisab, then you start counting the new hawl if what you got in exchange for it is also zakatable, one, and two, is at or above the nisab. The next thing that we added here to what the Sheikh Rahimahullah said is Ar-Rabi'a. The Sheikh said 2, 3, so we added 4. إذا باع أو أبدل النصاب بغير مال غير زكوية. If the hawl is also truncated, just as we just said here now, if one sells wealth that is zakatable and is at or above the nisab, sells it or exchange it, and one gets in return something that is not wealth that is not zakatable, then the counting ceases also. And there's no time when one will, start counting again, except when that non-zakatable wealth is sold or exchanged for wealth that is zakatable and has attained the nisab. Number 5, we added to what the Sheikh said here is that Al-Khamis, number 5, إذا تغير نية أو صفة الاقتناء إلى نية أو صفة لا تجب زكاة لا تجب الزكاة معها. If the intention or the manner of retention of the wealth, if the intention behind retention of the wealth, ownership of the wealth, your intention for ownership of the wealth changes to an intention that will make that wealth no longer zakatable, or if you keep that wealth in a manner that makes it no longer zakatable, then the haul, the counting, the waiting period before paying zakah will become truncated, invalidated. Example, you have sheep that are free range, non-walking sheep. So you're to pay zakah on that. If they reach the nisab, which is 40 minimum, you pay one sheep. So let's say after a year, you've paid the zakah one sheep, you bought another one, still 40. So you're supposed to start counting again. But you now change your intention that this sheep, I no longer just want to keep them like that. I can make money from them. So let me now start trading in them. Before, you just had them as your livestock. You weren't trading in them. They will reproduce, a sight to behold, they were adding to your wealth, but you are not trading in them. So in that category, you pay one sheep out of 40. Between 40 and 120, you pay one sheep. But now you change your intention to make them trade goods. I'll now, open a stall and be selling sheep. At this point, when immediately you had that intention, then you start counting, even before putting it into action. You start counting 1 year, one lunar calendar from that time. And once that lunar calendar, is up, then you pay 2.5%, which is what you pay on trade goods, any trade goods. You pay 2.5% on that. Now, also, the sifa, it may not be the intention that changed. It may be the manner that changed. Let's say the manner of retaining the wealth that changed to make that wealth no longer zakatable. That also truncates the how, the counting of the how. An example, I have free range, non-working animals, and they go about eating. Then, let's say there are a lot of animal rustlers around now, stealing animals and things like that. So I decide to keep them in their barn, not allowing them to go out. And this condition of stealing of sheep and all that, persists until over a year. So during that 1 year, even though I didn't intend that I will be feeding them, I was forced to feed them. I intended that they will go out to graze. They'll be sa'ima by that, free range. But because of the condition, they were no longer free range. And that lasted for a year. I fed them. Then in this case, they are no longer zakatable. They are no longer zakatable. The livestock that are zakatable are either the ones that you have as trade goods or the ones that are free range, eating from what Allah has supplied directly without you dipping your hands in your pocket for that purpose. So this is this is a fifth reason why the haul will be truncated. However, if you trade something for its like, you trade gold of a certain design for another design. You trade or exchange sheep of a certain breed for sheep of another breed, or cow of one breed for another, breed, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. Your change of, because you're still working in the same category. You're still working in the same category. Once your exchange has not led to a dipping in the threshold. So let's say an example. You have low priced sheep, 40 of them, and you exchange them or sell them, or let's say you have low priced sheep, 60 of them, and you sell them or exchange them for high priced sheep that are 40 in number. That is still, in both cases, you're still within the nisab. The minimum is 40, so you're still within the nisab. So you're changing from one type of sheep to the other doesn't affect. However, if you traded it for 13, your 50 sheep, your 60 sheep for 39 sheep now, then it will no longer become zakatable. Not because you change one breed of sheep to another breed of sheep, but because it had dipped, the number had dipped below 40. If they were trade goods, the sheep, you were selling sheep, and you did what we did, you traded 60 sheep for 39 sheep, you will still pay zakah in this instance. Why? Because they are not sa'ima, they are not free-range, non-working animals. They are trade goods. So you will, as long as they are trade, even if it becomes one that you have in stock, you will still pay 2.5% of its value once one lunar calendar goes. So this movement from category to category is important to note. Now, so with that, we ended the, the Sheikh added one more point, that is urud at-tijara. Trade goods are not affected by this change from one category to the other, because trade good is not a single category, it is a broad category. So in my shop, I can have sheep, I can have goats, I can have cows, I can have camels, I can have dates, I can have, different things that are zakatable that I'm selling. But because I'm selling all of them, they are packed into one general group of trade goods. So if I have a store and I'm selling things, and I sell anything out of them in exchange for something else, or I exchange anything out of them in exchange for something else, they are still all trade goods. What I sold or exchanged and what I got in exchange for it, everything are trade goods. So I will now have to pay zakah on them. And the zakah to pay on trade goods is the value on the date that zakah is due. So if at the end of the year, I had shoes that are worth 100 dirhams, and at the end of the year, the shoes are now worth 200 dirhams, then my zakah will be based on 200 dirhams times the number of shoes that I have. I get 2.5% of that. If it was the reverse, at the beginning of the year, the shoes were worth 100, were worth 200. At the end of the year, when zakat is due, they are worth 100, from 200 to 100. The zakah will be based on the 100 that is left times the number of shoes, and I'll pay 2.5% of that. So that is what we ended with how the tenor, that the time that one waits for before paying zakah. So the next topic, al-mubahath as-sadis, is zakatul dayn, zakah on loan stroke debt. Zakah on loan stroke debt. So if you are giving it out, you are loaning someone. If you are getting it, you are receiving debt. You're indebted to the person. Okay. The Sheikh Rahimahullah says, As-sawab min aqwal ahli al-ilm, said, what is the most correct from the statements of the scholars, the people of knowledge, which immediately tells you that there's different opinion on this topic, is that anna dain, is that loan or debt, alladhi yanqusu nisab, that reduces the nisab that one has, la yamna'u zakah, does not prevent one from paying zakah. Wa bithaluhu, example, rajulun, a man, yamliku ashrata alaf riyal, he has 10,000 riyal. This man has 10,000 riyal. We are taking it for granted that this 10,000 riyal is at or above the nisab. We are not looking at the current value of gold because it always change, but the text will not be changing each time that the market price changes. So we make that assumption that this 10,000 riyals is at or above the nisab. Hala alayha al-hawl. He retained this 10,000, this man retained this 10,000 riyal for 1 year. Wa alayhi dayn. During this period, he was indebted. Yablugu khamsata alaf riyal, to the tune of 5,000 riyal, half of what he had. And again, we assume that once he removes anything from these 10,000 riyals, it dips below the nisab, which will make it non-zakatable again. So the question is he owes a debt of 5,000 and he has 10,000, which is zakatable because it is at the nisab. Is he, before paying the zakah, is he to consider, on the dates when the zakah is due, is he to consider extracting the 5,000 that he owes in debt or not? Fi-l zakah, the Sheikh Rahimullah says the more correct or the most correct opinion of the scholars is that alayhi zakah, there is zakah on him. Fa-alayhi zakah al-ashra, and the zakah is on the 10,000 that he has with him. Illa an yaqdi ad-dayn qabla an yahulu alayhi al-hawl, except if he had paid the debt that he owes from the money from the 10,000 that he has before the due date of the zakah. Now he has a long period of time to pay that debt. If he doesn't pay that debt up until the due date, then the debt that is repaid on that day is the debt owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with respect to zakah. فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ زَكَاةٌ إِلَّا فِي بَاقِي بَعْدَ الدَّيْنِ. If he's in a situation where he had paid 5,000 to offset his debt, leaving him with 10,000, leaving him with 5,000, then there's no zakah to pay except if that 5,000 that is left with is at or above the nisab. If not, then the nisab, there's no zakah to pay. If the nisab is at 10,000, then there's no zakah to pay, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La zakah fi malin hatta yahulu alayhi al-hawl." There's no zakah on a wealth until 1 year has passed over it. So he had 10,000, 1 year didn't pass over it before he deducted from it, and it fell below the nisab. So there's no zakah to be paid. وَكَذَلِكَ لَوْ كَانَ عَلَيْهِ دَيْنٌ يَسْتَغْرِقُ النِّصَابِ. The same thing will apply if he has debt that eats up the entire nisab, not just that it reduces it. He has 10,000 with him and he has a debt of 10,000. أو يزيد, or he has 10,000 with him, he has a debt of 20,000. أو يزيد عليه أو يزيد عليه فعليه زكاة المال الذي يحول عليه الحول وهو عنده. As long as he chose by himself not to pay that debt until the due date of Zakah, then he must pay the Zakah. He must pay the Zakah. So we'll skip the example for that because it's clear. Now, كل ما دار عليه الحول وإن كان صادقا فليقضي إنه يزكي كل ما دار عليه الحول. So each person must pay zakah on what 1 year passes over while it is in his possession. وإن كان صادقا, if he is truly truthful about paying his debt that he owes, فليقضي الدين قبل أن يحول الحول, then he should pay the debt before 1 year passes on the wealth that is zakatable. لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يأمر عماله بأخذ الزكاة ممن عليه الزكاة ولم يأمرهم أن يسألوهم هل عليهم دين أم لا. And he said the reason why they hold this position, the scholars that say that debt, if you don't pay it before the due date of zakah, cannot prevent you from paying zakah, or should not be factored in while you are paying that zakah. They said the reason is that the Prophet ﷺ will send out a zakat collectors, and he won't instruct them that when you get to the people that you're going to collect zakat from, ask them whether they have debt or not. No, they just, what do you have in wealth? They assess the wealth and they calculate zakat and collect the zakat from that, and that's it. They don't ask, do you have debt? That is for the man to know and extract and pay back to the person he owes it to before the due date. So that when the zakat collectors come, what they will see is what he has at that time in period in time, and they will determine whether it is zakatable or not. If it's zakatable, it will only be on that. They won't ask you, what did you have before this? ولو كان الدين يمنع الزكاة لأمر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عماله أن يستفسروا في أهل الزكاة. If the scholars are saying, who hold this position, are saying, if debt was to prevent or influence the zakah payment or the amount that be paid in zakah, the Prophet ﷺ will have told them to factor it. You have told the zakat collectors to ask the people for their debt, and they will factor that. عليهم دين. Well, I ask them, do you have debt? وهو قول ربيع. This is the position of Imam Rabi' وحماد ibn Abi Sulaiman والشافعي, also the position of Imam al-Shafi'i fi-l-Jadid قوليه. He had two positions. Imam Shafi'i had two positions on a previous position that debt, if one is indebted, he doesn't need to pay. But later he changed that position to a newer one, which is that debt does not prevent you from paying zakah. لأن المالك حر Muslim, because the one who owed these debts and zakah is also due on him is a free Muslim. ملك النصاب, he also had wealth that has attained the nisab. Hawlan, he retained it with him for 1 year. فَوَجَبَتْ عَلَيْهِ زَكَاةَ مَنْ لَا دَيْنَ عَلَيْهِ. Then zakah becomes compulsory on him, just like if he didn't have any debt on him. When we're listing the prerequisites, absence of debt was not one of those prerequisites. Islam was, freedom was, possession of certain types of wealth was, that wealth written in the nisab, was you exercising 100% ownership and jurisdiction on it, was it staying with you for 1 year, was out of these prerequisites. There's no point in those, there's nowhere in those prerequisites where it is stated that you should be absent, you should be free from debt. And if that was added, subhanallah, very few people will qualify to pay that, will qualify to pay zakah. Now, Imam Al-Mardawi, he said, إِذَا لَمْ يَمْنَعُ الدَّيْنَ الْأَدَمِي الزَّكَاةِ. He's saying, debt that does not interfere with your payment of zakat is all type of debt, whether it is debt owed to human beings or debt owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For instance, a man that met his wife during the day of Ramadan. So he is to feed people, and if he doesn't have this, but it's to free a slave. If he doesn't have this, it's to free people, 60 people. If he doesn't have this, to pay fast for 2 consecutive months. If he doesn't have money to free a slave, for instance, or he has money to free a slave. If he has money to free a slave, this is a debt that he owes to Allah. So he's to pay, that. It's not to, and when zakat is due on that same time, at that same time, then it's not to, say, oh, because the money I'll use to buy a slave and free him or feed 60 people is, is equal to the money I have with me for paying zakat. So therefore, I won't pay zakat. No. It is a debt that you owe to Allah, separate. You had an opportunity of paying that debt before the due date of paying zakat. You didn't, for reasons best known to you. So this is a separate debt that you owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pay that one, which is the zakah. Then you will deal with the other one of meeting with your wife in Ramadan later. So this is what Imam Al-Mardawi said. So إِذَا لَمْ يَمْنَعُ دَيْنَ الْأَدَمِ الزَّكَاةِ. If debt owed to human beings, according to the most correct opinion of the scholars, does not prevent one from paying zakat, فَدَيْنِ اللَّهِ مِنَ الْكَفَّارَاتِ وَالنُّذُورِ وَدَيْنِ الْحَاجِ وَالنَّحْوُ لَا يَمْنَعُ بِطَرِيقِ الْأَوْلَى. They say if payments, debt owed to human beings does not prevent one from paying zakat, then debt owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, whether it is from kafara, like the case we described, or nudhur, you swore that if Allah does something, you will do that thing, and that thing costs money for you to do. So you're indebted to Allah for that, purpose. Or Hajj. A Hajj is due on you and you haven't, gone on Hajj. Then all these debts also owed to Allah does not prevent you from paying the zakah. Now, zakat al-dayn ala al-naw'ain. The Sheikh rahimahullah said that zakah of dayn, zakat in relation to dayn, to debt or debt stroke loan, is of 2 types. النوع الأول, the first type, dayn ala al-mali, معترف به باذل له. Debt, or rather a loan that one gives out, one is to pay zakah. Okay, and when he is to pay the zakah, he remembers or he knows when on the due date of the zakah, he knows that he had lent somebody money. So let's say he has 100,000 dirhams and he had lent somebody 20,000 dirhams. On the date when the zakah on that 100, let's start again this way. He had 120,000 dirhams with him at the beginning of counting the hawl. So he lent somebody 20,000, leaving him with 100,000. This 100,000 stayed with him until the due date of paying zakah. The 20,000 that he lent somebody, is it to be factored into how much he will pay? or not? Is he to extract 2.5% as zakah from the 100 that is with him, or from both the 100 that is with him and the 20 that is with his debtor, making 120 in total? The scholars differ on this, but the more correct opinion is that it depends, that is in two areas, and that's why the Sheikh put it here. Says the first of them is if your debtor is mali, is a wealthy person, mu'tarifin bih, he does not dispute with you that your money is with him. Say that your money is with me. Badhinillahu, he has no problem with paying you whenever you ask for the money. So it means therefore that there's no difference between this rich man that is your debtor, that you're a creditor to, and you putting money in the bank. You have your money and you just put it in the bank, and they just give you, a platform, a portal, so you can see digits of, the value of your money. But the money itself is not with you; it's with the bank. You've saved it with them. But on the condition that whenever you need it, collect it, either entirely or part of it. So you go to the ATM and you withdraw when you please. So it's the same thing. So if you lent it to a man who is wealthy and he does not dispute, now, when did you lend me money? You didn't lend me money. No, he didn't say that. He agrees that you lent him money, and he's also saying anytime you need your money, come and collect it. Then, if this is the case, all the shurut of paying zakah is still present. You have 100% ownership of that money, and you also have 100% jurisdiction, tasarruf, in that money. You can take it anytime. So it doesn't matter whether it is with that man, or it is under your pillow, or it's in your bank account. It's the same. So the scholars who hold this position, which is the correct opinion, Allahu A'lam, says, فَعَلَى صَاحِبِهِ زَكَاتُهُ كُلَّ سَنَةٍ. Then it is compulsory on the one who is to pay zakah on that money that he loaned out every year. Because he has the opportunity at any time to ask the man, but he said, let me just still leave it with him. So that 20,000 said, let me just still leave it with him. No problem. The Sharia does not require that you collect your 20,000 back before paying zakah. No, it's just the calculation. You have 120, pay 2.5% of that. كُلَّمَا حَالَ عَلَيْهِ الْحَوْلِ. So whenever 1 year passes, then he pays. For as long as he decides to leave that money with his debtor. كَأَنَّهُ عِنْدَهُ. As if there's no difference, as if it was with him, under his pillow anywhere. وَهُوَ عِنْدَ مُدِينٍ كَالْأَمَانَةِ. It is with the debtor in this scenario that is painted as amana, like you put money in a bank. وَسَمِعْتُ شيخنا الإمام ابن عبد العزيز ابن عبد الله ابن باز رحمه الله يختار هذا القول. And the Sheikh rahimahullah, Sheikh Al-Qahtaaniy, he says that he heard Sheikh bin Baz selecting this position as his favored position. وَهُوَ قَوْلُ Uthman. It's also the position of companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like Uthman bin Affan, wa Abdullah bin Umar, and Jabir bin Abdullah radiyallahu anhum. وَالطَّاوُوس amongst the Tabi'een, وَالنَّخَعِي, وَجَابِر bin Zayd, وَحَسَن, وَالْحَسَن, وَالْمَيْمُون, Ibn Mahran, وَالزُّهْري. All these are Imma, وَقَتَادَةَ, All these ai that were mentioned, this was also their position, that you haven't loaned somebody money and you have free access to recall that money whenever you wish, then you have to pay zakah on it. The second type is أن يكون الدين على المعسر. If you loaned out money, you had 120, the same scenario but different recipients. Now you had 120 at the beginning of the counting of a howl, and you gave 20 to someone and you retain 100 on the day of paying the zakah. What the Sharia wants to know is, do you have jurisdiction on that 20 that is not with you or not? So if you give the money to a mu'sir, someone who doesn't have wealth, is a poor person, he doesn't have the money, in short, he doesn't have the money that you loaned him, he is not yet able to pay back, he's facing hardship in paying back. Then al-jahid, or someone who says you lent him money but is now denying it. Say, when did you give me money? I've never asked you for money. I never took money from you. Or al-mumathil, someone, he has the money but he doesn't want to pay back. Says, come tomorrow, come next month, come the month after that. He continues to look for a way to extend his payback period. There are funny people like that. فالصحيح من أقوال العلماء, what is sahih, the most authentic out of the positions of the ulama, أنه لا يلزم صاحب الدين أداء الزكاة. From this we know there's different opinion among the scholars, but the more correct opinion, because لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, Allah does not burden his soul beyond what it can bear. And we looked at the shurut of paying zakah in the beginning. Now in this case of the mu'sir, of the jahid, of the mumathil, the one in hardship, the one disputing the loan, and the one who is deliberately evading repayment of your loan, in this case you don't have the money with you and you don't have jurisdiction over that money. So the most correct opinion of the scholars is that the owner of this money, there's no zakat on that portion that is with any of these people that I mentioned, any of these debtors that I mentioned. حتى يقبضه من هذا المعسر أو المعطل. So there's no zakat on it until he receives it back. It could be 5 years, it could be any time like that. It is when he receives it back. Now, the scholars differ. Now that he receives it, now that he has received it, what is the impact of zakah on that? Is it to pay zakah on each year that it was outside his possession? Or there's no zakah, it's just added to the money he has now, and start counting a new howl for that new one that entered now. For that 20 that entered, now, it starts counting a new howl for it. Which one? The Sheikh Rahimullah says, فَإِذَا قَبَضَهُ اسْتَقْبَلَ بِهِ حَوْلًا جَدِيدًا. The most correct opinion of the scholars is that he starts counting 1 year, because that is when he got ownership of it. And that is when he was able to exercise full jurisdiction on it. We'll go back to the shurut. That's why we started that at the very beginning. The shurut that must be present before zakah is obligatory on one. So he starts counting anew from when he got it. However, we didn't say that, what we said is that it is not compulsory on him to pay zakah. He didn't say that he cannot do that which is mustahab by paying the zakah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you help me get this money back from this man that didn't want to pay me back. So, as gratitude, I will pay zakah on those previous years that it wasn't in my possession, even though it's not compulsory on me to do so. So we've looked at, we previously looked at the permissibility of paying more than one's due of zakah, and also paying zakah when it is not yet due. So we looked at that. فَإِذَا حَالَ الْحَوْلِ زَكَاهُ. So the Sheikh is saying the most correct opinion of what is compulsory is that when he gets it, he starts counting 1 year from that point that he receives it. Then when 1 year clocks, he pays zakah on that. وَلَا يَلْزِمُهُ زَكَاتُهُ إِذَا قَبْضَهُ إِلَّا بَعْدَ الْحَوْلِ كَامِلَ عَلَى الصَّحِيحِ. This is what is authentic. وَلَوْ زَكَاهُ بَعْدَ قَبْضِهِ عَنْ سَنَةٍ وَاحِدٍ كَانَ أَحْسَنَ. Some of the scholars say that there's a middle course, which is also mustahab, not compulsory. According to the most correct opinion of those who hold this opinion that we're about to say, some say it is compulsory, is that issue after getting it, could be after 10 years, whatever the number of years, that you should pay for 1 year only. Again, there's no hadith to this effect. There's no verse of the Quran to this effect. There's no practice of the Prophet ﷺ to this effect. It is just something that the scholars, advise as, mustahab, shukr. Allah has returned the money to you. Do something of gratitude. So you could choose to pay 1 year, a zakah of 1 year, out of the number of years that that the money was away from you, or you could decide to pay, every year that it was away from you. If you don't do either of these, there's no problem whatsoever. You're free. The shurut for paying the zakah were not complete with respect to this money, so you are not obligated to pay. Now, it says, وَلَوْ زَكَاهُ بَعْدَ قَبْضِهِ عَنْ سَنَةٍ وَاحِدٍ كَانَ أَحْسَنَ وَفِيهِ احْتِيَاطٌ. It says if he pays for 1 year after collecting it, then this is good. And it's also edges on the side of caution. لَكِنْ لَا يَلْزِمُهُ ذَلِكَ. However, it is not compulsory on him. It's not compulsory on him. He's just looking for, nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وسمعت شيخنا Imam Abdulaziz ibn Baz rahimahullah ta'ala يختار هذا القول. The Sheikh Rahimah said his Sheikh Imam Ibn Baz also held this chose this position as his favorite position. Now, some of the scholars say that لا يجب الزكاة الدين على المعسر. So if one loans out money to the following groups of people, it is not compulsory on one to pay zakah. We talked about a mu'sir, someone who is having genuine difficulty paying back. Well, jahid, someone who is contesting, having collected the loan from you. Al mumatil, or someone who is not contesting, has the money but doesn't want to pay. Al al-maksub, or money that was seized from you, either illegally or legally by the government. They froze your money because they believe it's either wasn't earned through legal means or something like that, or they suspect that it wasn't. So for that period of time, they ask you to come and explain yourself. You don't have access to it. Or money, nobody stole it from you, nobody seized it from you, nobody is having difficulty paying it back. You didn't even loan it, but what happened? You lost it. You had the money and you lost it. It's gone. It's not zakatable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not ask you to pay zakat of money that is lost. لأن صاحب الدين لم يملكه ملكا لم يملكه وملك شرط, because the in these cases that we talked about, the owner did not own this property during this time when the debtor couldn't pay back, or during the time when his money was frozen. He wasn't, he didn't have ownership of the money. He didn't have also tasarruf in the money. He didn't have tasarruf in the money. He didn't have jurisdiction over the money. Some of the scholars, however, made an exception, which is also correct. They say, تجب الزكاة في مال دفنه ونسيه. If somebody buried money or kept money somewhere and he forgot about it, either he forgot about it or he remembered the money but forgot where it is, as it also says here, أو جهل عند من هو. He knows that he has this money. He knows that he loaned it out, but he can't remember who he loaned it to. إذا وجد. So when this money is discovered, تجب الزكاة فيه. Then zakah is what? Is compulsory on that money. فَيُزَكِّيهِ لِمَا مَضَى. And he is to pay zakah on it for the length of period of time that that money was in a place where he could not determine. Why? لأنه ملكه وإنما نسي. And that is because the money was always his. It was always in his possession. It is just that he forgot where it was. So, for instance, someone who has Alzheimer's disease is an elderly person. He has wealth and he has Alzheimer's disease. He's forgotten. He can't even remember his own name. Is zakat to be paid on his wealth or not? Zakat is going to be paid on his wealth. He's not remembering his wealth does not stop zakat from being payable, because he still has milk. He still has ownership and jurisdiction over the money. It's just that he is in a situation where legally he is able to, exercise jurisdiction, but it is something intrinsic to him that prevents him from exercising that jurisdiction over his wealth. The same, somebody that forgets his wealth. There isn't anybody except that he would not remember all his wealth all the time. It's not possible. You have everything that you own in your head 247. No. So forgetting your wealth is not one of the shurut. Not forgetting your wealth is not one of the shurut for payment of zakah. So if you buried it somewhere, doesn't want to take it to the bank, or even before banks were available, and he forgot, like in Surah Al-Kahf, the man that buried his wealth under a wall, built a wall over it, so that by the time his children, are of age, the fence will probably, collapse at that time, and they'll be able to access it. When the wall wanted to collapse before that time, Musa, Khidr, helped to rebuild the wall. So this is so one not remembering where one puts money does not mean that the money is not zakatable. It doesn't mean that the money is not zakatable. In this case of the Khidri, whenever the children discover the money, in this case it's not wealth buried in the time of Jahiliyyah. If it's their parents, then if they are the only inheritors, this is the time when they gain possession of that wealth. It's not that they have backlog of zakat to pay. No, they didn't own that money before discovering it. So once they discover the money and they know, oh, this is our father's money, perhaps they left a note there or something, and then this is our father's money. Then, it becomes theirs at that point. If it reaches the nisab, they start counting each individual's share. If it reaches the nisab, they start counting from that portion, from that time. And a year after that, one lunar calendar after that, he pays the zakat. So the Sheikh rahimahullah said, وَالنِّسْيَانُ لَا يَرْفَعُ الْوُجُوبِ إِذَا تَذَكَّرَ. So he says, forgetting does not, so forgetting does not lift an obligation of one. وَمِثْلُ ذَلِكَ مَنْ نَسِيَ الدَّيْنِ الْآدَمِي. For example, an example is one who is indebted to another human being. That you forgot that you are indebted does not lift that. So the owner of the money comes, the money I lent you in Muharram, it's time to pay back. I've forgotten. No problem, now you remember. Pay me back my money. So, how Allah, what debt that one owes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ka-salah was-sawm, like someone who forgets salah. What did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? He should pray it when he remembers. Never oversleeps past salah or he forgets, should pray it when he remembers. So Allah won't say, oh, you forgot, khalas. So salah is a pillar of Islam, zakah is also a pillar of Islam. So forgetfulness does not, lift that. And this last part was out of discussion I had with Malam Abghani Jum'ah on this issue some time ago. So inshallah, we'll stop here. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. If Allah wills, we'll continue next class.